So that was Hebb's idea, and it, as I say, was very influential. The problem was that where were these synapses? Where were these synapses A and B, such that when A fired or helped to fire B, the synapse between A and B was enhanced? Nobody knew where they were. People were looking for them, but they weren't easy to find. So when we think about the kind of memories that we want to be encoded, and the kind of memories that we're talking about here, I'll talk about this a bit more later, are the memories of our own lives, the events of our lives. And this, of course, involves very many parts of the brain, the sensory organs representing the things that we see, the things that we hear, the things that we touch. All these are active, and all these form part of the thing to be remembered, the event to be remembered. And all these primary sensory areas are project to secondary areas, and from those secondary areas, they all funnel together and head towards a structure called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus has played a seminal role in the evolution of the understanding of memory. And in fact, the rest of my talk is going to be about the hippocampus. So I would like you not to try to remember the complexity of the real brain, but the simplicity of the hippocampus embedded in a real brain. This is what I'm talking about, and we can call the rest something for future work or future talk. So this structure, which is embedded in the temporal lobe, it came into fame in a rather unfortunate way when a patient known as HM, who in the 1950s in his hometown of Boston was a severe epileptic, and his condition couldn't be controlled by the drugs currently available. The focus of the epilepsy was somewhere in the temporal lobe, and this part of the brain here, which contains the hippocampus. And the surgeons determined that the best thing to do for HM was to remove the temporal lobes on both sides of his brain, which they did. The consequence for HM was pretty dire because he lost the ability to form any new memories of his life. And that remained the case until he died, and he died quite recently, about 2 years ago. Speaking about his condition, here's a picture of him as a middle-aged man. He talked about the fog of the present. The present was always with him, but it had no past. His memory span was a few minutes at most. For him, it was always as if he'd just woken up. Everything was suddenly gone. You know how evanescent dreams are. It was like waking up from a dream. He said he just couldn't remember what had happened 10 minutes ago. So, of course, you can't live a normal life in those circumstances. And HM was institutionalized for the rest of his life. And there he was studied by psychologists, particularly Brenda Milner, who was also at McGill. And the study of HM has told us a great deal about the organization of human memory. So let's see what HM has told us about the structure of memory. So there are three broad classes of memory, which we can call working memory, declarative memory, and non-declarative memory. Working memory has nothing to do with the hippocampus, or very little to do with it. It's the kind of memory that allows us to remember or not to remember where our car keys are, where we put our glasses down, a telephone number which you keep in your head for long enough to write it down. It's a few minutes, and it's widely distributed in the cortex. These two classes of memory, declarative and non-declarative. So declarative simply means it's a memory that you can talk about. And that's subdivided into episodic memory and semantic memory. So we have episodic memory is the memories of our lives, the events that have occurred to us as we pass through life, and which, of course, is an absolutely integral part of our own perception of ourselves as individuals. Semantic memory is our knowledge, what we know about the world. And what H.M. told us was that episodic memory requires the hippocampus. You can't make new memories of that sort without a hippocampus. His semantic memory of the past was all right, but his memory of new events, new pieces of knowledge, the fact that there had been space flights, for instance, was very rudimentary. And that's probably because that kind of memory involves the hippocampus to some extent, certainly the temporal cortex, but also other parts of the brain. So what we learned from HM was that you need the hippocampus to form new episodic memories. You don't need the hippocampus to store memories forever, for the rest of your life, because HM had reasonably normal memories of his boyhood. They were as rich as most people's. He just couldn't form new memories, and he had impaired memory for the events of the year or two before the operation as well. So that's suggesting that you need the hippocampus. Information needs to be rooted into the hippocampus, and perhaps to stay there for a bit. But eventually it gets shipped out, presumably to the cortex, to the areas that were activated when the memory was laid down. What we also learned from HM was that there are other sorts of memory, apart from working memory, which don't require the hippocampus. And this includes motor memories, motor skills. And HM, for instance, learned to play ping pong when he was institutionalized. But if you asked him, can you play ping pong? He would say, no, I never learnt it. He had the motor skill, put him in front of a ping pong table, and he was fine. But he had no recollection, no memory of the episodic memory of learning how to play ping pong. He had the motor skill, but not the episodic memory. So he has taught us a great deal about the stratification and structure of human memory. And when he died 2 years ago, there were long and appreciative obituaries in the neurological press. Another way in which you can define episodic memory is to think of it as the what, where, when system. So, for instance, to take an episode which everybody in this hall will remember, the day that the planes flew into the World Trade Center. That's what happened. Where we were, well, where I was in the main lecture hall watching it all unfold on television at the National Institute for Medical Research, where I was at the time. You will all remember where you were. And we know when it was, 9/11. We might think that this form of episodic memory is peculiar to humans. I mean, anybody who has a pet dog, for instance, will certainly know that the dog has a perfectly good memory for some things. It will have a vague memory, one imagines, of what going for a walk is like. It probably won't remember what a particularly good walk it had last Thursday week, or a year ago. So it's been quite difficult to establish that animals, as well as humans, have this what, where, when system. But in fact, some animals do, and a well-known example is birds, some species of bird. And these experiments were done by Nicky Clayton in Oxford, started in the States. So here's her subject. This is a western scrub jay. And here it is in the process of, well, it's either eating peanuts or hiding them. And one of the things that these birds do is hide food, or cache it, as it's called. And they have a fantastic memory for where they've hidden food. But do they have a what, where, when memory? Can they distinguish yesterday from a week ago? And the experiment that was done to establish that, in fact they probably could, is illustrated in this cartoon. So the bird was given two sorts of food. Waxworms. I don't actually know what a waxworm is, but if you're a scrub jay, it's the best thing on earth. If there are no waxworms available, then peanuts will do. But as delicious though waxworms are, they tend to go off after a few days. And a week-old waxworm is not good eating. And in those circumstances, one would rather prefer a peanut. So the birds were given waxworms and peanuts, and they did the thing that they do, which was to hide them. And they hid them in this little box here, under gravel or something to hide them. And then they were allowed back into the room 4 hours later, and they retrieved the waxworms. They weren't interested in the peanuts when waxworms, good-tasting waxworms, were available. But if you brought them back to the room 5 days later, they went for the peanuts. So they've got a memory, an ordered memory of when they did things. That's very much like a what, where, when sort of memory. Another way in which one can think of the episodic memory system is that it allows what the Canadian psychologist E.C. Tulving called mental time travel. We can move back in time through our memory processes, but we can also look forward in time, things that haven't yet happened, and have expectations and hopes and aspirations and so on. That seems like a pretty human thing to do. Can animals do that? Well, let's see. But first I want to show you an example of this mental time travel, which a postdoctoral fellow in my lab a few years ago called Sam Cook made the next 3 slides for a talk he was giving at a local school. So here is Sam in the present. Okay, sorry. So here's Sam, and here in the animal house, and that's why he's wearing this funny hat, and here are 2 little mice he's got. And Sam is now looking back. He's mentally traveling back in time to an episode of his childhood when his elder brother apparently gave him a kick in the shins. This appears to have made a deep impression on Sam, who has never forgotten it. And here he is at the time, post-kick. So he's traveling back in time, several years, obviously. But at the same time, he's able to look ahead to what he anticipates to be a successful future.